I'm going to be talking about designing logos. So here we go. Lovely quote from Paul Rand about the importance of a logo. If in the business of communications, image is king, the essence of this image is the logo is a jewel in its crown. A logo really should communicate so many things about a business. Really, we should look at a logo and be able to identify, what the business wants to portray about itself. Sometimes what the business is about. But there's a lot of things communicated, a lot of decisions made with a logo that encompass a business. So here we go. Very briefly about using logos historically. So when villages formed and people began living together, something had to be done to confirm ownership of things. It used to be that, being so far apart, they didn't need to worry about who owned what because it was more, this was on my property, this is mine. But so potters marked their vessels with their own mark, and higher quality potters who produced better items had the opportunity to make sure people knew this was theirs, and so their reputation was able to grow and had more business. So these cylinders, this Mesopotamian cylinders, were used as seals to authenticate and seal documents, which is pottery. That's what they used as documents then. The Chinese also contributed to early writing and identification. Their calligraphy was first used around 1800 BC with characters supposedly inspired by the footprints of birds and animals, but the characters known as logograms were symbols that represented an entire word, and over centuries the Chinese created paper and devised ways to print on it. Potters continued to identify their work by stamping their mark at the bottom of their pots. You can see an evolution of a German potter's mark here. Interesting, the word brand derives from an old English word that meant to burn, and it came to mean a mark that was burned into the skin in order to signify ownership. The term logo dates back to ancient Greece, and it literally means name. So I remember doing a lecture a tour of design department to like third graders, and I said, okay, I deal with branding. When you hear the word brand, what does it mean? And some of the kids said, well, it means to brand, like I think of branding a cow, and I say, yeah, I do too. But why did they brand cows? Well, they brand them to signify ownership. So if one got out, they would know whose cow it was, and there wasn't a confusion about this is my cow, this is your cow. So, and that's what we do with branding, with logos now, is we're showing ownership, that it comes from a certain entity. So whenever we see it, we can identify it, this item, truck, a website, a brochure, an envelope, with that company. So what makes a logo good? Let's go through a few attributes. First, it is distinctive. A logo should have an appearance unlike that of other logos. That's why it's important to do research when you're doing a logo for a particular company or type of company. Excuse me, look at other companies like it to make sure it's distinctive. These are classics. Each has its own distinctive look and is immediately recognizable. A logo should be sophisticated. When doing a logo for a company, at least 95% of the time, companies want to look sophisticated and in good taste. That does go back to having appropriate imagery, fonts, colors, and motifs. So make sure those are working for you as well when we're doing a logo or a brand. Take away any elements that are not contributing to the goal of the logo. If we're saying sophisticated and there's something in there that doesn't communicate that and is maybe superfluous, oust it. With that said, a logo shouldn't be stuffy, meaning unnecessarily somber or unpleasing. Also, a font or color palette that's inappropriately conservative can make a logo stuffy, so we need to watch out for that. And speaking the last little bit on sophistication, avoid uncomfortable imagery. So if you're doing like a logo for a funeral home, don't put a coffin in there. There are other ways to, that really doesn't say. Anyway, I won't go there. Don't use uncomfortable imagery. Okay, conceptual. A conceptual logo contains elements born of intelligence and thought. Smart logos suggest smart companies and products and services. So a little bit of ingenuity and cleverness goes a very long way to communicate things about a company. So we'll look at this. This is a very good example from cubic meter. By simply turning that M, lowercase m, 90 degrees on its side, rather than doing the obvious number 3, the mark becomes more distinctive and more memorable and visually interesting. This is another really good example, lithographics. It looks like an unusual letter L for lithographics, but it also communicates what the business does. It's about printing. So here we're seeing a print being transferred from a plate to a substrate. So if you've done any printing or been to a printing press, you can see this happening, this process. And it still has that letter L, so it's very clever. Okay, a logo is also relevant. When imagery is relevant to the product, service, process, or entity, the logo relates more clearly to that which it represents. The inclusion on one or more relevant visual elements, provided they don't undermine the simplicity of the logo, adds layers of secondary information about the entity. Multiple layers of information, if effectively integrated, can make the mark richer and more visually interesting, even if the secondary image is not readily detected, like the arrow in the FedEx. Eventual detection will have an effect similar to the exposure of hidden information, enriching the logo once revealed. However, just a warning, if you're too specific about what the company does and the company decides to expand or evolve, that can make your mark irrelevant and unusable. A logo is versatile. So whether the mark is applied to a 60-foot billboard, an airplane, or a pen, it should read well. Sometimes you may need to create a small version of the logo or even a reverse version of the logo. And many times you do. Remember, logos are likely to be produced in many ways and on many materials, including metal and wood, plastic, and cut vinyl. So even a little logo that appears in the URL bar when visiting a site, which is about 1/8 of an inch high, shows the versatility of a logo. Always begin working in black and white. You'll first show black and white versions to your client. This is the basic essence of a logo and will be used in many instances in black and white. It must work in black and white. A logo is cohesive. If you feel you need to draw a box or a circle or another shape around the logo, the chances are your logo lacks cohesion, and you probably need to re-look at your design. When a logo does feel detached or fragmented or disjointed a bit, you may need to re-look at the negative space of the logo. A logo is attractive. It's true that this has some realm of subjectivity, but there is some universal appeal when talking about the attributes of a logo. And so in 1960, if you polled 100 men if Elizabeth Taylor was attractive, you'd probably get 95% that say yes, she was. The point here is that there are things of beauty that have broad, if not universal, appeal to viewers. Cultural influences have some weight on this, but the goal is to have some visual appeal to the greatest number of viewers possible. The logo is not really just for a select few in most cases. A very large majority of the cases, it's for the general public, and it has to have universal appeal. Symmetry is one of the characteristics that makes a person's face attractive. Other factors play into the equation, like how your skin is and your bone structure and things like that. For logos, symmetry and composition, proportion, and balance all come into play for an attractive logo. Okay, legible. If you have to read the type on the logo or make it as legible as possible. And it's not only type. If an element is introduced in a logo and no one can identify what that object is, you have a legibility problem. If it's a car, a 4-year-old should be able to identify that it's a car. If logos, if objects or words don't read quickly and easily, they probably should be refined until it's figured out. Yeah, so here we have this logo type was done in 1964 by Chermayeff and Geismar, and it's very legible. Very, very legible. In contrast to mobile is this micro center. Mobile endures because it's simplicity and legibility, and the red O gives it distinctiveness. This micro center is dated and difficult to read. We're getting close, but a logo is memorable. If designed well, a frequently seen logo can be readily recalled by a viewer. A mark that's simple in construction, though not necessarily in concept, is generally easier to recall. This is advantageous when building and maintaining brand loyalty. Recognizable silhouettes can make easier identification. I'll say it again, recognizable silhouettes can make easier identification. The benefits of memorability are obvious. Memorability means familiarity, brings a comfort level and a sense of trust. Trust is really good when money's concerned, and increased sales. So a memorable logo is equated to better sales? You bet it is, of course. And a logo is enduring. A logo like a brochure or an ad whose shelf life is about 6 months, maybe 3 years, must work for decades. Your client will be investing too much time and money and effort in getting their visual identity up and running to want to start the process again in 10 years. What is equity? There is equity in a logo. The more face time with the public, the more equity is built up. Changing a logo frequently diminishes equity. So sometimes updating a logo is undertaken to retain some of that equity. So it's like a refresh, in other words. How do you make a logo last? Stay away from trendy images and fonts and colors that tend to date a logo. You can tell very quickly when logos were designed around the 2000-ish era. They usually have a big swoop in them that kind of looks like an orbit. So stay away from trendy imagery. You don't want other designers to identify when the logo was built, okay, like some architecture or movies or art. You want it to look timeless. A few other bits. Money does make a difference. Nike is more recognizable and memorable than Ore-Ida potatoes. You hardly ever see Ore-Ida potatoes, and the other you see daily. Millions of dollars are pumped into marketing and branding, and so it becomes more recognizable, more trusted. It also should be multicultural. So companies spread abroad, and there's wider audiences to reach. They need to maintain multicultural relativity and readability. Also, another important thing is the ability to be animated for a logo with use on commercials and the web. So that's it. Great. Thank you.